After World War II, France was the first NATO member to question America's influence in Europe. This skepticism has remained over the decades, and in recent years, it became more visible, particularly during Donald Trump's first presidency. His tariff policies, specifically targeting French wine, were supposed to hurt France, but they ended up causing major financial problems for American restaurants, bars, and wine stores. Many businesses in the U.S. faced severe revenue losses, with some even shutting down. Recently, there has been increasing tension among NATO allies regarding Europe's reliance on the United States for security. As Trump has returned to power, Northern European countries have started forming independent military groups like the Joint Expeditionary Force. At the same time, France has remained committed to its long-standing belief that Europe should take responsibility for its own security instead of depending too much on America. Looking back at history, France's position seems almost prophetic. Charles de Gaulle, France's leader after World War II and again in the 1950s, was deeply skeptical of American dominance. In 1968, he famously said, "You may be sure that the Americans will commit all the stupidities they can think of, plus some that are beyond imagination." Just 2 years before making this statement, France had taken a bold step. It withdrew from NATO's integrated military command and asked all American troops to leave French territory. De Gaulle believed that Europe needed to be self-reliant when it came to defense. His vision seems more relevant today than ever, especially with Trump openly criticizing and pressuring U.S. allies. De Gaulle had extensive experience. He led the Free French forces during World War II, fought alongside the British and Americans in Africa and Europe, and was instrumental in shaping France's military independence. His leadership laid the foundation for NATO's most independent military force until Sweden and Finland joined the alliance many decades later. France's approach to military self-reliance has allowed it to remain largely independent of American influence in its defense policies. Many European nations are now considering a similar strategy. France's model provides a way for the European Union to strengthen its defense without relying too much on the United States, which has become increasingly unpredictable as a military partner. This idea may not sit well with some European nations, particularly Britain, but if Europe wants to take more responsibility for its future, it needs to look beyond past rivalries. France has consistently advocated for European military independence and has resisted becoming a financial supporter of the U.S. defense industry. Instead, it has focused on investing in its own defense industry, prioritizing self-sufficiency, and avoiding involvement in unnecessary U.S.-led conflicts. Unlike many NATO allies that depend on American military technology, France has maintained its own powerful expeditionary forces, ready to engage in conflicts where necessary, especially in Africa. It even developed its own nuclear deterrent, despite American protests. This approach proves that European nations do not have to be subordinate to the U.S., instead, they can be equal allies. France's skepticism toward American control began as early as the 1950s. After World War II, the U.S. wanted to introduce the dollar into the French economy and even considered dividing France into different zones controlled by Allied powers, similar to what happened to Germany. Even Britain opposed this American proposal. When France suggested the formation of a European army, the U.S. repeatedly rejected the idea. Over time, France became frustrated with the growing presence of American forces on its soil. By the mid-1960s, the French government felt that NATO's military bases in France were beginning to resemble an occupation rather than a defensive alliance. At the same time, while the U.S. was growing wealthier, France and Britain were struggling under heavy war debts. France was also engaged in brutal conflicts in Indochina and Algeria. When Charles de Gaulle was elected Prime Minister in 1958, one of his first major actions was to develop France's independent nuclear capability. Within just 2 years, France had built its own nuclear weapons. In 1965, France decided it had enough of NATO's structure and withdrew from the alliance's military command. By 1967, all U.S. and NATO personnel had been ordered to leave French territory, and most American forces relocated to Belgium. Despite leaving NATO's military command, France remained a NATO member and an ally, but it refused to participate in the alliance's military decisions. It did not return to NATO's military command until 2009. Instead of depending on NATO, France strengthened its military ties with European allies and continued to advocate for a fully independent European military force. While other European nations did not immediately follow France's lead, the strategy has proven highly effective. Today, France has one of the strongest land armies in Europe, a highly developed defense industry, and one of only 2 nuclear deterrents in the European part of NATO, with 290 submarine-launched and air-launched ballistic missiles. For many years, France has been the most vocal advocate for European military independence, urging EU nations to invest in European-made defense equipment rather than buying weapons from the United States. Today, with Trump once again in power and openly questioning NATO's value, many European leaders are finally starting to understand what France has been saying for decades. France may not have had the strongest military reputation after World War II, but over time, it has built one of the most advanced defense industries in the world. It produces top-tier military hardware, including tanks, artillery, fighter jets, warships, submarines, drones, and air defense systems. France is now the second-largest arms exporter in the world, holding 11% of the global market in 2022. One of its most successful defense products is the Dassault Rafale fighter jet. Currently in its 4th modernization phase, this aircraft has been sold in large numbers to India, Egypt, the UAE, Croatia, Indonesia, and Qatar. It is the only European-made jet capable of operating from an aircraft carrier. France has exported 323 Rafale jets since 2021, making it the most widely exported fighter aircraft in the world after the American F-35. The newest Rafale upgrades even allow it to detect and track the F-35, neutralizing the stealth advantage that makes the F-35 so expensive. In the naval sector, France became the world's top exporter of warships in 2022, selling vessels to Egypt, the US, Greece, and Ghana. The Dutch Navy has also placed major orders for French-built submarines. Originally, Australia had planned to buy the French-designed Barracuda-class submarines, but under American pressure, it switched to US submarines. Given the current geopolitical situation, reconsidering that decision might be a good idea for Australia. Another major French defense success is the Caesar self-propelled artillery system, which has performed exceptionally well in Ukraine. Due to high demand, production has increased to 144 units per year. The latest version of the Caesar now features artificial intelligence for counter-battery fire, a more powerful engine, and enhanced maneuverability. It also includes an advanced electronic warfare system to defend against drone attacks and GPS jamming. France has also invested heavily in armored vehicles, producing advanced tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and personnel carriers with state-of-the-art protection against modern threats. In the field of air defense, France has developed the SAMP-T system in collaboration with Italy. Additionally, France and Britain have jointly produced the Scalp, Storm Shadow long-range missile, which has been highly effective in Ukraine. Since the 1960s, France has focused on investing in European military technology rather than American systems, spending an estimated €50 billion per year on its defense industry. This strategy has created thousands of jobs and established France as Europe's leading military power. France has around 5,000 defense companies employing over 400,000 people, far more than Germany, which has only about 100,000 people working in defense. For decades, French leaders have pushed for deeper European military cooperation. François Mitterrand proposed helping other EU nations develop their own nuclear deterrents, while Emmanuel Macron suggested in 2020 that France could extend its nuclear protection to the entire EU. However, American diplomats have consistently opposed giving Europe greater control over NATO's military affairs. Henry Kissinger once said, "It may be dangerous to be America's enemy, but to be America's friend is fatal." As Trump continues to pressure NATO allies, more European nations are beginning to realize the need for independence. France, along with Sweden and Finland, has shown that Europe can defend itself. The question is, will the rest of Europe finally follow their example?